Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed, and we took a week off, but now we're back.
Here we are.
We're back.
Sissy, you're going on sabbatical soon.
I am. A week and a half, I think.
My goodness.
Not that I'm counting. Yeah.
Are you ready? Are you excited?
Oh, I'm excited, but I
okay.
think I'm going to have a very difficult time my first week. I'm already trying to brace myself. What is this like?
I've said so much about my first week and how hard it was that I think Sissy's expecting it to be horrible. It's probably going to be great. It's just I love this.
I don't know what Barry's talking about.
What's his problem?
Sissy caused a collective gasp on Sunday as in the sending she starts off. Where at the very last thing she said, on a personal note, this is.
I don't think there's a collective gasp.
It's gonna be my last Sunday preaching in a while.
For a few months.
For a few months. And I was like, everyone calm down.
And I said I'm coming back in July.
Yes.
I was very clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, we'll miss you. We're excited for you.
I'll miss you guys.
I'm sure we'll talk about your sabbatical again.
We will, yeah.
Next week.
Yeah.
And then as you keep doing the podcast while you're on sabbatical. So today we're going to talk about environmental stewardship, the conversation that goes on around climate change. And, I think even, when we first, started talking about this subject, that's when the fires were happening in LA. Even recently, Brian's in the studio there. His wife, Erin, has some friends in Oklahoma and Stillwater that lost their houses in the fires in Oklahoma. And, I feel like just this conversation around weather, sometimes it gets intense at times because then, the political parties get involved and all this stuff. So let's just zoom out for a second and just say, should Christians care about environmental stewardship, climate change?
Well, short answer is yes.
Well, good. I'm glad we agree on this.
We've
All right,
answered that. Yeah.
We got to come up with a topic that the people on the green sofa actually disagree about. That would actually make for an interesting podcast. But we're in agreement.
Probably
here,
be musical taste.
Take it.
Our musical taste is very
There's
different.
a few pastors we could call up in DFW. That we could.
Yeah, I mean, at least a few reasons for that. So first of all, God created the earth, or God created the heavens and the earth. Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all that live in it. And so when you think from that perspective, if God created the earth, he cares about the earth. As his children, we should care about it as well. And it's a way for us to honor God and to see the beauty of what he's made and to care for it. So that's the first thing I think about. And then he's given us a role as when we talk about environmental stewardship is because God has given us that responsibility to steward the earth. That's part of the cultural mandate where Genesis 1:29, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing. And part of that subduing, part of that having dominion is that God is calling us to care for. In Genesis 2:15, he says to Adam to work the garden, right? And to care for it. And so there's this twofold responsibility of working it and caring for it. And so we're to cultivate the earth. We're to care for it. We're to be responsible for it and not to protect it, not to harm it. Thirdly, I would say it's a way to love our neighbors. I think we've talked about that before, but caring for the environment affects the present generation, but it affects future generations. You think about your children and your grandchildren and so on and so forth. But it also, those that are most significantly impacted when we don't care for the environment are the most vulnerable. Because it's people that are living in poverty that are most affected by pollution and deforestation and resource exploitation. We may not feel it as drastically or as severely as they do.
That's right.
And then another reason I think about is that creation points to the glory of God, right? So Romans in chapter 1, Paul talks about that God's invisible qualities are seen through the beauty of creation. And so if creation points to the glory of God, if it reflects his goodness and his beauty, then we ought to care for it. And then the last thing I would say is that creation is part of God's plan for redemption. So if we believe there will be this day where King Jesus will return, where he will right every wrong, he'll fix all that's broken, and he will redeem, restore, and renew all of creation, including us. So if creation is part of God's ultimate future, then our present, what we do in the present, ought to align with that future, right?
So good. I mean, I think you covered really the basic ground here of such a great, helpful theological framework for thinking about this question. And I think it's important for us just to acknowledge that, you brought it up in terms of climate change, and that's such a debated, contested kind of issue. And it really is, I think, very unfortunate the way in which that issue has become so politicized and so partisan. And so you can kind of anticipate how somebody sees this issue based on kind of a broader partisan kind of orientation. And yet there's the recognition when it comes to thinking about it framed as environmental stewardship, there's so much for Christians who may disagree about other public policy issues to actually hold in common. And nobody, regardless of your political leanings, is sort of off the hook in this regard. All of us should recognize there is a Christian responsibility, a kind of theological vision that calls us to be good stewards of God's creation. You mentioned the cultural mandate. So in Genesis 1, when God makes human beings in his own image, that word image is tselem, and that is really, I think, the human job title, right? Our job is imager of God. And then you get the job description, and it's 3 Hebrew words, radah, maleh, kabash. Rule, fill, and subdue. And each of those has their own unique little nuance. But we are stewards, right, ruling over God's good creation on his behalf, partnering with God to see his will done on earth as it is in heaven. Radah maleh, to fill the earth, this idea of expanding and creating culture, and then kabash, this pretty strong Hebrew word that really just talks about taking something that is wild and untamed and bringing it under control. And so all of those fit together to talk about what is the fundamental human job responsibility is to partner with God in the flourishing of his creation. And this is part of what it means for us to image God. Like if we want to really wrestle with what does it mean that human beings are made in the image of God, it's actually related to this role that God has called us to play, to partner with God in the flourishing of his creation. And some have actually pointed back to that, and even that word kabosh that can be used in other places as a kind of exploitative term, and kind of used it as an excuse of like we can do whatever we want to with, and that is not at all the theological vision of the book of Genesis. God looks at all that he's made and said, it is good, it is good, it is good, it is good, it is very good. And the human role is to partner with God for the flourishing of his creation, which has profound implications then for the way in which we see our role in addressing issues around environmental questions.
Yeah. I think there's this tension between, as image bearers of God, we have the responsibility of developing the resources of creation for the flourishing of humanity, and at the same time preserving the resources of creation. Right?
Yeah, there's a dual aspect of this that is like for the good of human beings as his image bearers, and for the good of this world that God has made and loves, right? This creation that he has made is something that, as we'll talk about it, I think in a minute, he's not interested in tossing out on the cosmic dustbin. That God is committed to this material creation. It is good. It is good. It is good. It is very good. And so our responsibility as Christians has both to do with our neighbors, making sure that our stewardship of this creation doesn't wind up having the kind of negative impacts, particularly on the weakest, most vulnerable, and for the good of the broader creation that God has made and called good.
Does our view of the end times contribute to how we view this subject as believers?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about that a little bit before, but our eschatology shapes our ethics in so many ways, right? But particularly with this in mind, with the environment, as I said earlier, like if we believe that there will be this day, we're not going to be beamed up to heaven, but actually God is going to redeem and renew this creation. If that's our future reality, then what we do in the present ought to impact what we believe about the future. Does that make sense? So that's what I would say.
100%.
Yeah.
So I grew up with a kind of version of Christianity that was just about getting us out of here, right?
Yep.
Evacuation, go to heaven when you die, and that's full stop. That's the end. Our eternal destiny is heaven, and all of this is going to melt away. All this is going to burn, and we'll talk about all of this is going to burn in a minute. But the broader biblical vision is not just about going to heaven when you die, but is actually about the language of Revelation 21, the new heavens and the new earth. And of course, that language from Revelation 21, the end of the biblical story, is language that comes originally from Isaiah the prophet, right? Isaiah the poet, who talks about this coming day when this material creation will be made new, right? The new heavens and the new earth. And so God made the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1. God is committed to this material creation. It is good. And so God's vision is the renewal of the heavens and the earth, Revelation 21, the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, right? God making his dwelling place with us here. And if you look carefully at that passage in Revelation 21, you maybe have heard me do the teaching around the giant gold cube, right? This holy of holies that's coming down out of heaven, the dwelling place of God. Now I feel like I have to explain the gold cube.
Yeah.
So there's this scene in Revelation 21, right, where John sees the new Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, the significance of Jerusalem is the temple. And of course, the center of the temple is the Holy of Holies. So the significance there is about the dwelling place of God. And the language is he will be with them. He will be with them. He will be with them. And so there's just this emphasis. God's dwelling place will be with them. You fast forward a few verses, and John talks about this angel that comes and measures the dimensions of the city. And it's as wide as it is long. So it's shaped like a square. But then it says, but it's as wide and as long as it is high. So actually we realize this new Jerusalem is a cube. And he gives the dimensions, and it's the equivalent of 1,400 miles, right, which is the distance from Dallas to New York, right? So
You've made that drive.
City, I have made that drive. I'm familiar with how far it is, how long
Yeah.
it takes to get there. And so he's saying this city that comes out down of heaven from God is that distance every bit as long as it is wide as it is high, this giant cube, and it's overlaid with gold. And you're going, wait, what? This massive gold cube sticking out the side of the earth. Well, when you see something strange like that, right, a gold cube, you go, have I seen this anywhere else in the Bible? And what you realize is the only other place that there's a cube that, oh yeah, by the way, just happens to be overlaid with gold is in the description of the holy place in the center of the temple, the Holy of Holies. And so what you get in John's vision in Revelation 21 is the new heavens, new earth is this world-encompassing Holy of Holies, the dwelling place of God. And so that's our biblical vision, not floating around in clouds, but actually renewed material creation, new heavens and new earth. Now, I grew up with a lot of emphasis played on this idea of it's all going to burn, it's all going to burn, it's all going to burn. And so where does that come from? Well, it comes from 2 Peter. Yeah, Barry brought his big blue Bible this time.
If you're not watching on YouTube, the Bible is being opened.
So 2 Peter chapter 3, and it's interesting to note in verse 13, but in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth. So once again, Peter is using the same language that Isaiah used and that John used to talk about this renewed material creation. But what's the whole burning thing? We'll back up a few verses. Verse 10, and Peter writes, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and the heavens will disappear with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare." Right now, that sounds like it's all going to burn, right? And so why care about the earth? Why practice environmental stewardship if it's all going to burn anyway? Well, it's important, once again, to note, back up a few verses. You read back in we'll start in verse 3. "But they deliberately forgot that long ago, by God's word," this is verse 5 actually, "long ago by God's word, the heavens came into being and the earth was formed out of water and by water. And by these waters also, the world at that time was deluged and destroyed. By the same word, the present heavens and earth will be reserved for fire." So, okay, so he's alluding back to the water that diluted and destroyed the world. What's he talking about? He's talking about the flood, right? That word destroyed in verse 6 is the same word that's used for destroyed by fire in verse 10. So destroyed by water in verse 6, destroyed by fire in verse 10. Now, did the world cease to exist when the flood happened?
No.
The answer is no,
Yeah.
right? So this language of destroyed isn't about
This complete.
this complete annihilation. It ceased to exist.
Yeah.
What was the destruction of the flood? It was the purgation.
Yeah.
Right. The purifying of the flood back in the book of Genesis. So what is the fire that he's talking about here? Does that mean that the earth is going to cease to exist? No more in verse 10 than it means that in verse 6. The fire of verse 10 is the fire not of annihilation, but of purgation. In the same way that the destruction of verse 6 by water is the flood of purging the earth of its corruption. So too, there is coming a day when there will be a purging fire, right? Everything that is corrupt in this world, everything that is marred by sin will be purged by fire.
Yeah.
And so we need to recognize that even there in that language where Peter talks about this coming day of purgation by fire, that still the point ultimately is new heavens and new earth, a renewed material creation. God made it and said it is good, it is good, it is good. God's not interested in just tossing that on the cosmic dustbin, but in renewing and restoring, purifying his good creation. So that has profound implications for the way that we live now. Our vision of the future, right, our eschatology, profoundly shapes our ethics today. We live today in light of what we know is coming.
It's good. It's good. You just got, that's Dr. Jones at his
feel
best
like we should
for
just
free.
Take
That was-
communion now.
Oh, my.
Yeah, that was good.
Bow
Yeah.
your heads, close your
Yeah.
eyes.
We have candles up here. at
No,
the-
I remember when I learned that from you in, was contemporary issues and spirituality, that class. And I remember being like, I had never seen that before, the golden cube, and seeing that, that's when you recognize, if that's our vision for the future, then like, yes, absolutely. In so many ways, what we do today ought to be in light of that. Yeah, that's good.
So why is the subject so why is there so much tension around it? Why does it so get political at times, even in church circles?
I mean, one of the number one issues is just economic interest. We talked a little bit about this even before the podcast, but environmental laws, environmental regulations often have financial impacts on billion-dollar industries. You think of oil and gas, agriculture, manufacturing, you can go on and on. And so when you have laws around carbon emissions and pollution and all these other environmental regulations that can significantly impact bottom lines and profits, you have lobbyists that enter the picture who are trying to push forward policies that will, positively impact industries and corporations in financial ways. And so I think politics and environmental interests sort of align in that way. I think secondly, there's a lot of partisanship around what is the role of the individual in terms of individual responsibility. Yeah. So is that stewardship of the environment is really about the individual, or does the government have a larger role to play in that? So is there government intervention and policies that are required for us to adequately steward the environment? There are two very different ideological camps around that, and they tend to evolve into partisan parties as well. And so I think that's part of it. I think as well, I just don't think the media really helps us with this. There's a lot of misinformation. And so the media tends to, and I would say this on both sides, really focus on extremism, where there's either one side that says, you know what, there's nothing wrong with the environment, where it's not that bad, you're exaggerating it, and sort of a little bit of denial. And then there's a more radical view of environmentalism, that they're dangerous and toxic and things like that. Where I think there's so much common ground for us to find together, but I don't think the media actually helps us with that.
Yeah, we get sucked into the divisiveness of this rather than recognizing, no, for us as Christians, right, apart from being pulled into these polarizing, partisan kind of perspectives, that there is so much common ground for us that comes back to this theological vision
Yeah.
that gets us out of the politics. I do think, I mean, I'm just enough cynical and jaded to say follow the money. Like, and I think at both ends of the extreme,
I agree.
there are economic factors that are at play that tend to create that greater sense of sort of polarization, rather than recognize there is so much that we can and ought to agree about and share as common concern. I think there's an aspect of this also that I know that, right, rather than merely just pointing to the way this is true of other people, I have to, it's self-incriminating.
Yeah.
And that is that we are profoundly selfish people who live in a society that reinforces our selfishness.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and again, this is a theological claim. What is corrupt with us in our fallenness, right? What's wrong with us as fallen beings, Augustine talks about as homo incurvatus in se, the being turned in upon himself. And so your deepest struggles, my deepest struggles with sin ultimately come back to this idea of like, well, I'm turned into myself. And the way of following Jesus is the slow, painful work of turning us out from ourselves towards God and neighbor. And yet I know, very much a selfish being by my fallen nature. And then we participate in a society that in a lot of ways really reinforces that selfish orientation. And so some of why I don't do more or care more about issues of environmental stewardship ultimately come back to the ways in which that creates inconvenience for me or creates the requirement of sacrifice for me. And so there are ways in which I kind of would rather not believe this really matters, not believe that this is actually something that's having negative impact on the world or on other people, because of the way in which that actually calls forth something from me that I would rather not
have to
sacrifice,
deal.
and I'd rather not have to deal with.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So
You're the only one that deals with that. Isaac and I are totally
No,
good.
no, it's I mean, I use paper straws. So, I mean, if I use a plastic straw, would you say it's a sin?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when you ask that question, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, because using a plastic straw, I would not say is a sin, but I think it leads to a broader question of, and it's a little bit of what you're trying to get to, of how do you play this role of a steward when you think about the environment in your everyday life. And so I don't think, every time I use a paper napkin or a plastic straw, that instance in and of itself is a moral issue. I would take maybe zoom out a little bit and think about what is the pattern of behavior in my life. So am I being, because I think that could tend to be a little legalistic in some cases, but do I have a pattern of intentionality in how I'm thinking about my stewardship of the environment? So am I thoughtful about it? Am I being wise with how I'm using resources? Am I over consuming? And so I think looking at what is my attitude and my mindset towards how I care for the environment is bigger, because for some people it's a matter of convenience. So I don't have to always use a plastic straw or paper napkin or a plastic water bottle. I have options. Other people don't necessarily have the same options. And so for some people it's a matter of convenience, for others it isn't. So I think you have to sort of balance that tension between convenience and responsibility. I can easily not use plastic water bottles, right? I could use a reusable water bottle, but not everybody has, and that's a very minor example, but not everybody has the same opportunities and options. So I think you have to think about that as well. But overall, I think it's a matter of are you being intentional in your desire to care for the environment?
Yeah, you're definitely sinning if you're using a plastic straw. So,
Thinking about
but
that.
for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So
use
you're
a
not going to
paper
hell
straw?
if you trust in Christ, even if you use. But don't use it as
turtles. I do love turtles.
So here's the deal. Again, it comes back to something we've talked about on the podcast before. Is there's sometimes that we would really love to have a rule.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we'd love to have chapter and verse.
Right.
That gives us a rule, so we could know black and white, right or wrong, right, good or bad. And it's clear and it's unambiguous. And there are certainly some of those things that we get in the scriptures.
Sure.
Right? We get clear chapter and verse that says this is wrong. There's a whole lot of other things that we don't get that in terms of chapter and verse. And so it's much more about what we've talked about along the way, cultivating that sense of Christ-like wisdom and virtue. And so that's that wisdom and virtue, that Christ-like wisdom and virtue that shapes the way that we make decisions. And again, I think there's the recognition, I always get annoyed when I use a paper straw. Like it's frustrating. Yeah. And yet the issue is, again, coming back to like, am I reacting to this because it's a personal inconvenience, right, and ultimately is really this is really just an issue of selfishness that I need to get over, rather than this is something that I need to sort of be on a crusade to, bring back the plastic straw.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to the loving your neighbor part of this. How is our stewardship of the environment, how is that affecting our neighbor? Or how is it, if we're doing it in a positive way, loving thy neighbor?
Yeah. So, I think, as Sissy alluded to earlier, part of it is recognizing that the people most impacted by environmental issues tend to be those who are already marginalized, already disadvantaged, the least of these. And so, our consumption here in the U.S. in affluent areas tends to have negative impact that we don't even see in other parts of the world. And so it's just the recognition, like what's easy for us to not see or look away from, we need to be able to be more cognizant of, so that we're making sure that we're not inadvertently participating in exploitation of our neighbors in other places. I think there's also just the recognition of, like, part of loving your neighbor is your neighbors of the future, right? This idea of, our future children and our children's children. And so the need to practice loving ways of life now for the sake of those who will come after us.
Yeah. I wouldn't really add anything else to that. I think, my overconsumption here in the United States has direct impact to people halfway across the world that don't have the same opportunities as I do. So I think about, when I go to India, and I immediately see the impact of how we're living in the West over there. And I'm rarely cognizant of that, so I think that's important.
All right. Well, thank you for that conversation. It was, it's such a unique type of conversation because, it feels like this gets brought up. You could search on different websites like Christianity Today or Relevant, and I read a bunch of articles on both of those sites, and every once in a while a new one will pop up about how to steward our environment or climate change, or there's a new debate out there. And I just think it was cool for us to have the conversation here, and it's something that listeners can go back to and for any type of direction or guidance in these conversations. But let's take a swerve into banter. So, if you're new to the podcast, we always spend the last, 5 to 10 minutes doing some fun banter stuff. And the question today, in the spirit of March Madness.
Let's go.
Sissy?
Oh, I'm working on it.
You're good?
I have some work to do. I have still research to do.
It took me about 2 minutes to just click. I just clicked down through, and
hey, but
in
you
some
did it, though.
places
That's good.
It was like I picked
he does it every
higher,
you did it last year, yeah.
And then in some places I was like, oh, you can't pick against that team.
Yeah, I like this team.
Yeah. So I don't know if Kentucky has any decent chance
Is
at
that
all
who you
of
picked?
winning, because I love Isaac. I picked Kentucky because I love Isaac. That's my thing. I don't know anything about college basketball. I don't know who's good and who's bad. I know names that I've heard through the years, and I love Isaac, so I picked Kentucky.
All right.
You probably should have followed Sissy's advice because she won it last year.
Yeah. I think I don't know. This one's hard.
It is hard.
This one's hard.
All right.
We'll come back to that.
In the spirit of March Madness and brackets and Final Fours, you got to give your Final Four of fast food restaurants.
Okay.
Has to have a drive-through.
Has to have a drive-through.
All right. Hold on. I got to think about mine.
Ooh. What are you starting with?
Oh, my number one's easy. McDonald's.
Oh.
That was my number one.
Kidding me? Are you
Listen,
okay,
you
talk
did
about
this like 2 years ago when we first started the
sofa?
podcast.
You
McDonald's is
actually
still
eat that
my standard.
trash?
If I have to pick fast food,
Come on.
which I rarely eat fast food, it's like probably like once a year,
Barry's
I will pick
disgusting.
McDonald's. That is like,
And they have plastic straws, don't they?
they do have plastic straws. They have the
Plastic
best
cups,
fries. We
too.
already covered that.
No, the fries are terrible. They might
Yeah.
have been good when we were kids. They're not the
A
same.
Big Mac and fries,
No.
like just that
Oh,
classic
no.
meal.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, what else
I'm
besides
happy.
McDonald's?
That's number one for me.
The number one seed, because we actually have to, like, you're already just declaring a champion without ever
I said
having
for
a
me.
competition.
My second one, this is very specific to me. So I don't think this is anyone else's second one. Taco Bell.
Oh my god.
Let's go. Mexican pizza.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Taco Bell,
Sissy.
Hive, stand up.
It's not Mexican or pizza.
It isn't. You're absolutely right.
I rock with
But
Taco
the
Bell.
combination.
Ugh, unbelievable. Like I have just a whole different
This is where we
perspective on my
disagree.
friend Sissy.
All right.
McDonald's, Taco
gosh.
Bell. I think my third, this is where I'm like, after that, I don't really eat too much, would be Popeyes.
Oh,
Yeah, I like,
kind of random. All right.
I could do that like
Okay.
every once in a
Popeyes?
while. Spicy chicken.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I have a fourth one. I don't know.
No fourth.
Maybe,
Captain D's.
what?
Long
no.
John
I
Silver's.
loved Captain D's and Long John Silver's when I was a
No,
little kid.
I don't
I
even
did
know what
too.
Captain D's is.
Seafood.
Yeah, we didn't have that.
Quote unquote
Yeah,
seafood.
We had the the fish fillet. Come on, that's what
My goodness.
Okay.
seafood was in
We'll
the
let
Northeast.
Sissy
I got
do
three.
three.
What do you have?
All right, so I definitely would go. The number one
Whataburger.
seed's going to be Chick-fil-A,
Oh, Chick-fil-A.
Whataburger, In-N-Out, and then the fourth. That's a tough one because there's a few different contenders. But you know, I mean, you mentioned Popeyes. Like
Popeyes.
yeah.
Remember the
Look
craze
out.
when that sandwich came out? It
Oh yeah.
was like
that
lines.
I
of
chicken
people.
can't
sandwich.
think of any other drive-through place that I would be more inclined towards. It would probably be another of the chicken places. So
So I forgot Chick-fil-A, which is like how could I
How?
forget Chick-fil-A? So I would do McDonald's,
Come at her over that.
Taco Bell, Chick-fil-A, and then I would do
Okay, that would be.
see, and
Yeah.
I was wondering like how Chick-fil-A couldn't even.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A
like
should be
you
in
couldn't
there.
even
You're
come
right.
up with a
You're right.
fourth one. Then Chick-fil-A.
I
seemed
really
right
don't
there
eat
on the
fast
phone.
food.
So-
This is like
I
a
didn't know if
stretch
you're-
So here's
for
the
me.
deal. In my
Christian or
bracket,
not.
it would actually be Chick-fil-A versus In-N-Out, and then Whataburger versus Popeyes. And that way, Chick-fil-A eliminates In-N-Out before they ever get to the finals, and you don't have this Whataburger
Yeah.
In-N-Out thing.
What's
Whataburger
fascinating
does get to the finals against Chick-fil-A, but Chick-fil-A wins.
Is
by
you
a
have thought
pretty wide
more about
margin.
that than the NCAA.
Chick-fil-A has to be in there. That's
Yeah,
that's
you're
a-
right. That
that's
was
a
like
lot. Okay, a secret
fail on
one
my
I
part.
kind of like. You're probably gonna make fun of me. Is like Jimmy John's.
Jimmy John's.
Oh,
Okay,
they
yeah,
have
no,
a
I like Jimmy
drive-thru.
John's.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like
you're
it.
right. They have a
Jimmy
drive-thru.
John's drive-thru.
Right.
One over there.
We saw each other at Jimmy John's last week.
Really?
We were
and I
driving
did.
out. Yeah, me and you.
Yeah.
We were driving out.
Yeah. I was in the line. She was
I
coming
was
out
leaving.
of the line.
Yeah, Jimmy John's is good.
Taco Bell. I rock with
Come
Taco
on.
Bell. Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
That's
when I
like-
was like 17, and you could get a
Yes,
59 cent
there's like-
taco and a 59-cent burrito.
I lived
I
on
would
Taco
load
Bell in
up on
college.
that stuff. But that's like I couldn't sleep for days if I had a massive taco.
Walking
Bell
over
meal now.
from high school to Taco Bell, and it was so cheap.
Yep.
And it was or after a practice or something. It's like, let's go to Taco Bell. And we're
Yeah,
just
it
like,
got me through college.
people, you have to outgrow that at some point, though.
There's still nostalgia involved. Yeah.
and then lastly, Raising Cane's.
Raising Cane's.
My daughter is a
Cane's.
big
Never
Raising
get-
Cane's fan, and the thing about it is the thing that the chicken itself actually has very little taste. It's
It's the
all about the
sauce.
sauce.
Yeah.
Because the strips themselves,
like-
the strips alone can't hold a candle to
can't stand on their
Popeyes
own.
No,
or to
no.
Chicken Express or pretty much any other.
My chicken tenders, I make some really
You
good
make
chicken
you make
tenders.
some good
Oh,
chicken tenders.
Good
Nice.
solid spices on them. You don't even need a sauce. Still
The
use sauce.
Harris
but
kids love the chicken
Oh, yeah.
tenders the dad makes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Fry them in avocado oil. Salt. Yeah.
Well, look at you.
process.
This
Yeah.
is like a step up for your peanut butter and jelly.
It is chicken tenders. So I mean,
It's
come on.
still right.
All right, let us know your final four in the
Yes.
comments.
Yes, let us know those, and we'll be back next week for another week of four.